Okay, fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get going. Would you let people know out there trying to grab a little nosh that we're going to get studying? We're going to get to our lesson today. So the exciting part is that I moved you guys through some really heavy material, and you did all really, really well because you asked me fantastic questions and made me think in some of the ways that I haven't thought before. And hopefully I have stimulated your mind in ways you haven't thought before and showed you something that you didn't know. Book of Romans is foundational. It is foundational. Why do people would want to study the Book of Romans? I tell people, for Jews, Book of Romans is actually important. Why? Because it is the primer of Christian theology. If you don't understand it, then you really cannot have an intelligent conversation with a Christian, because majority of their doctrines will come from the Book of Romans. Believe it or not, that's where. Not from Matthew, from Romans. It's not going to come from Moses. It's not going to come from Yeshua. It's going to come from Paul. That's just where it is. So, Romans, Galatians, Corinthians, Colossians, Philippians, this is the bedrock of Christian theology. If you want to have a decent and intelligent conversation with a Christian, that's what you have to understand. But these are all very Jewish documents. Why? Because Shaul is a Jew. Because Shaul is a rabbi. Because Shaul studied with one of the greatest rabbis in Israel. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel II, okay, who's the grandson of Hillel himself. Do you understand? This is what Shaul studied. This is the kind of people that he learned his Torah with. So he knows it. He knows it well. He knows it back and forth. Yet God has given him an amazing vision, an amazing mission, and it is to reach the nations of the world with the good news of Yeshua. And to him, that is transformational, and that's why he's writing a letter to Romans, because he wants these people to understand what the good news are for Jews, Greeks, and barbarians. That's what he said. I'm obligated to the Jews, I'm obligated to the Greeks, I'm obligated even to the barbarians, the people I really don't understand what gibberish they're talking. I am obligated to them as well to share these things. So let me give you just a little bit of a reminder of where we've been really quickly. We've talked about this fundamental worldview difference. A singular sovereign and almighty God stood at the top of Israelite hierarchy. We all know this because we say the Shema. All things came from him, and his gifts and callings are irrevocable. Just think about it. That's what Shaul said. That's a very foundational statement. This is an idea of the covenant that God makes and maintains for his own name's sake. This is important for us. He may execute judgment, he may punish, but in the end, his promises stand firm. And on that is the core of Judaism. That's why we recite the Shema. That's why we look at the passages like the Akedah, because they're foundational in us understanding who we are, what bedrock we stand on. So in the last session, we looked at the vision of worshiping God and bringing ourselves as living sacrifices. It was a beautiful metaphor that we looked at. We also, since Shaul will speak next about gifts and positions and all kinds of things in the next chapters, we also delved into the social layers of Roman society. And we looked at the very similar layers in Jewish world. Not similar, but let's say analogical. So remember all the different classes of societies we looked at. We compared them a little. We didn't have a lot of time to do that, but we did some. And so the Roman competitive system that I talked about, the system of clients and patrons and favors, which are gifts, by the way, and honors, they came with certain expectations. Gifts, callings, positions, and privileges in the Israelite world came from God, and they were different. And this is where these things don't connect. Sometimes we speak the same language, but what the person hears is very different because they're conditioned culturally to respond completely different to the same exact word. Words stimulate things ideas. So I say gift, if you come from an Israelite culture, you think God giving you a gift or something like that. And if you come from a Greco-Roman culture, you think of a rich patron, your sugar daddy or whatever, giving you some sort of a gift, and you're like, okay, that's what you're thinking. So now I have to owe him because you owe me now because I did this for you. So this is a major worldview difference that existed between ancient Israelites and ancient Romans. And Shaul is bumping into that, and he knows that he will be misunderstood. So I'm bringing this out for your sake because a lot of times we don't realize that that's there. So we're in Romans chapter 12, and this is where we stopped last time, and I wanted to pick up there. It says, for through the grace or favor, in this case the word is charis or chen in Hebrew. This is grace or favor given to me. Shaul is not who he is because he made it. He actually realizes that he is an apostle. He's been called by God as a gift. I just got this. God gave this to me. This was a favor given to me. I say to everyone among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith or faithfulness. Remember how we talked about faith means faithfulness? Pistis is that word that can mean faith or also faithfulness. It's emunah, right? So it's multifaceted word. For just as we have many parts in one body, and all body parts do not have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Messiah, and individually parts of one another. What I hope you realize that Shaul is doing in this verse, that he talked about the olive tree before, and an olive tree was a beautiful illustration. Now he uses the human body to show the same type of thing. This is just another analogy, this is just another story that he brings in to help us understand that we're in this together. And now he uses a human body. So he says that I don't want you to think more highly of himself than the one is ought to think. He's not putting people down, by the way. He just says, I don't want you to elevate yourself over others unnecessarily. You are who you are, and that's who you are. Don't try to be something you're not, and don't try to put yourself down either. You are who you are. Just have a sound judgment, realize this is how things stand, and live in accordance with the measure of faith, of faithfulness. Live commensurate to who you are, appropriately for what your function is. This is where we get into theology that I think is actually quite heavy in Shaul's teachings that people completely miss. He says body has many parts, and body's parts do not have the same function. Did you catch that? Body parts don't have the same function. In another letter, he says, which body part would you like to give up? Right? And like, if I asked you, which part of your body is not important? What can I cut off today? What can I remove? You know, you wouldn't say, no, I don't want to give up anything. Like, they're all kind of necessary, you know, I need them. So he is going to get into this idea, very briefly, that the way we work as a community is we have functions, we have designations, we have roles to play. And the role of one person, however you see it, is not any less important than the role of another person, because working together is what makes it come and work properly. Yes, Jeff?
Very similar. I mean, he's bringing in Judaism has always had different types of functions.
Yep.
Within that, so not just like Gentile or Jew, but within the Jewish world, you've got Cohens, you've got your functions. So
right.
It's a very common concept.
And we actually studied this idea of functions quite a bit in a different teaching. We talked about the two roads, and I explained the different paths that people take towards God, but in the end, it's all about functions. It's God sees us fitting into His story, His plan, in a variety of different ways, and not one of us is, sort of say, better than the other. Like I said, which body part would you like to give up? Do you want me to cut off the left arm or the right leg? Like, no, I kind of need them both, right? I don't want to give up either. It's when we're whole and complete, that's when things work. And that's the idea. So Shaul's illustration of human body is really presented not to highlight uniqueness. He's not trying to say, oh, you're all unique, okay? Not to outline our differences, but and to reduce it to the practical aspect of the whole. That's what he wants to do. It's cohesive function. It's all about, body is all about how it works. And the point is simple. Body parts are very different, but they all work together to make the body function. This is unity in diversity. with all your different parts, unified, they actually make it work. And that's the idea. So the roles, the functions, the work that each part does actually kind of define it. That is its designation. That is its purpose. That is its glory. And these functions were assigned by the Maker, not by the body parts themselves. What if an eye decides I want to be a foot? Right? No, not going to work. Not going to work. Not equipped for that one. We can roll that way. So, you get my idea. The Maker is the one who decides which body part does what, right? The body parts don't get to pick their positions. There is no competitive system for achieving higher positions in the body. If you understand the Roman system of making it in the world, basically you can be the foot and you can make it to be the head eventually. Like you can work your way up. If you really, really work hard, you could get there. But not in this paradigm, not in this worldview. And these are just different ways of looking at the world. This is different ways of looking at how God works and how we work as a community and how we organize our society. So Shaul is presenting a different paradigm to somebody who's actually used to a very different system. And I hope you realize that he's doing that, which is why we've been discussing all of this language of hierarchy and social structures and layers and tiers of society. That's really what that was all about, by the way. So let's keep reading. Romans 12, 6 through 8. However, since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to use them properly. If prophecy, in proportion to one's faith. If service, in the act of serving, or the one who teaches, the act of teaching, or the one who exhorts, the work of exhortation. The one who gives with generosity, the one who is in leadership with diligence, and the one who shows mercy with cheerfulness. So he goes through a whole list of gifts over here. And so what he's trying to say is that being a part of this interdependent system that we call a body, well, you can go back to the tree idea, because it's really no different. He's trying to illustrate the same idea. One has to function in accordance to one's calling. Whatever you are, whatever your skill is, whatever your ability is, and you do so in harmony to support the overall system. It really is that simple. He gets into this discussion of gifts, which people make a really big deal about it, but it really isn't a big deal because I can replace these gifts with other things, right? If I say, if your calling is a priest, then just be a priest. Do that. If you're a Levite, do the job of the Levite. If you're from the Levite family of the Merari, you know what your job is to do. Do that, and do that to the best way that anybody can do, and you are fulfilling your purpose, your designated place in a system that God has created. So he uses ideas like prophecy and service and teaching and exhortation. Why? Because those are the gifts that people were actually practicing in that community, in that congregation. And you may be surprised by, I guess, some of them. Maybe prophecy, perhaps, is the one the most surprising to people, because I have seen people abuse that concept. I've said this before, and let me state it again, just for clarity and purpose. Prophecy is not fortune-telling. Prophecy has nothing to do with future. It's not foretelling, it's not pre-telling, it's not future-telling, it's not soothsaying. Okay? This is not magic palm reading. Prophecy is to serve the community. Most of the time, prophecy is an exhortation. Prophecy is a call to repent. That's what the prophets do. Prophets tell you, follow the Torah. Return to the path from which you have departed. Not in 17 days, your windows will be wide open and a leaf will blow from a tree. And you'll know that God is going to bless you. Or something crazy like that. You know, I'm making it up as I go on. What prophecy is, yes, so do they, exactly. What prophecy is and what prophecy is not. We live in a crazy world full of charlatans and ignoramuses who will tell you all kinds of things, but study biblical prophecy. You have books of books and books of prophets. How many future predictions do they make? And if they make future predictions, those predictions are always Not for so-and-so and so-and-so. Occasionally it's for a king, okay? Occasionally. Sometimes it is personal, but most of the time it's for a nation, it's for a people, or for the whole world. That's really what it's about. But soothsaying and palm reading is really done on a one-on-one level, and usually for a fee. So let's pass the plate, right? All right, I'm being irreverent now. I'm going to stop. I get sometimes aroused about things like that. I do get upset. I do get upset when people take something beautiful and misuse it and pervert it and twist it into something that it's not meant to be. Prophecy is a wonderful gift. I do believe that it still exists today, because I do believe that people can call out, sometimes leaders, sometimes nations, to return to Hashem, because we have made many departures from Torah, and the prophets need to continue to speak, and we have plenty of prophets that speak to us through the ancient pages, but why can't we say that in our community we can't have somebody with a gift that does that? And that's what they did in Rome, apparently. They had some people who functioned in that kind of way. Not predicting future, but forth-telling God's words and what they mean and calling us to repentance. So service, serving other people, teaching, all these things, they make sense. The prophecy one, that confuses people. So, and there's other gifts, lists of gifts in the writings, of the apostolic writings all throughout, and maybe one of these days we'll get to them. But for now, I just want you to see that Shaul is saying, God has given us gifts. These gifts are different. They're given to us by Him. We don't get to pick them. We don't get to say, excuse me, sir, I would like this one, please. Because I would like to be the head, please. Can we make sure that I'm the head? Whenever that plays out, can I be in charge? No, you don't get to do that. Just God gives you a gift, and either you are or you don't. Either you have this amazing ability, gift, or skill, or something that you develop, and people recognize it, and that's what you end up doing, or you don't. These things come from God. Can you develop some of these things? Yes, perhaps you can. But some people are truly gifted. We recognize that. And it's almost like it has to come from God. Because why? Why can't I sing as good as that? Not because I didn't practice. It's just because I can't. It's that simple. Yes.
You said, why can't I be the head? And sometimes we think, like the head is in charge.
Right.
But when we're speaking about the body, like you said, you don't want to get rid of any part of your body. So there's really not one that's in charge,
Right.
and that one that is better than the other. We all have to make
Right.
work within ourselves. I mean,
That's Shaul's
if
point.
you've ever broken one of your toes, then you understand the need of that toe.
Yes. Then all of a sudden, the head suffers when the toe is broken, because the pain signal is sent to the brain, right?
Exactly.
And the brain interprets it, and the whole body aches. Yes, and then you get all kinds of terrible feelings. Yeah. So we get the idea of what Shaul is trying to say here. He's given us all the different functions in the community, and he says, work within these and recognize who you are, and be sensible about it. So I'm not going to go through all of the chapter 12. I'm going to start summarizing a little bit for us. So for the rest of chapter 12, Shaul will continue to list many of the practical biblical teachings. And you will generally outline what it means to be a decent person in the Jewish cultural framework. That's what he will do for the rest of chapter 12. You can read it on your own. Trust me, I'm not skipping anything super exciting, because if you read the Torah, you know exactly the kinds of things he's going to say anyway. So he mentions the deeds of compassion, prayer, benevolence, hospitality. He cautions about pride and repaying evil for evil, showing disrespect, seeking revenge. He will even teach about how to turn adversaries into friends as the chapter ends. So these are all good practical things, but it's not anything new if you read the Torah. Now, if you're Roman, it's a whole different story. Most of chapter 12 are practical how to get along and work together lessons. That's what they are. With Torah as its guide, Israel had to learn how to work together for ages. Just think of how many years it took for Israelites to learn how to cooperate. We don't do it very well, but all Romans know is the system where one succeeds at any cost. You just climb on other people and step on their heads and whatever you got to do. The gods of Rome don't have commandments. They don't say, take care of the poor people, be nice to them, give benevolence. Like they no obligations. Gods don't have that. They themselves compete for power and influence constantly. Have you read the stories of the gods? Read Greco-Roman mythology, you understand. It's all one big, huge competition. And they're always conniving and going at each other in these stories. So these practical lessons that Shaul offers to Romans are very useful to former pagans, more than anybody else. That's what they're for. It's basically Shaul distilling the Torah. So as this teaching continues, in chapter 13, Shaul instructs about respecting local authorities, being good citizens, paying taxes. Yes, he talks about paying taxes and fees, and showing people and authority proper honor and respect. Yes, that's in the Bible too. He eventually gets to the essential rules of human behavior, such as marital fidelity, murder, theft, coveting, and gives special focus to love. Because the one who loves will be following the core of the Torah's teachings anyway.
Amen.
So this is a beautiful distillation. If you really read 12 and 13, you get this beautiful summary of some of the best teachings of Torah, all kind of culminating in this idea that love really stands at the core of things. If you learn how to love God and you learn how to love people, you've hit a lot of the really good, important things that you should, right? And the rest is more specifics. But if that's what you're guided by as your core belief, as your core understanding, that you are already on the right path. And I hope you realize that this is what he's doing to, again, reach the people who don't really have much going for them in a sense of biblical education or exposure to a world that actually lives this way. They don't have that. I mean, you realize most of us live in a very orderly society, and Western civilization has civilized the world by using the Bible and biblical ideas. It really transformed them from an awful pagan, debaucherous place into something quite civilized, something really beautiful. I mean, there's so many things that are happening in Western civilization that are good because they got it from the Torah, from those principles, the ideas, which did not exist naturally in those cultures. They came in through this source. And New Testament and writings of Paul are the ones that people grabbed onto, but the principles, the ideas, they're all coming from the Torah. So if you notice, Shaul is teaching the principles of Torah without actually teaching Torah. He does that. That's what he does. The question is why? And the answer is because most of his disciples are not Jews. So he doesn't have to actually get them to teach all of the laws of the Torah. There's a lot of things in there that are kind of hard to understand. Let me say two words. Tazria Metzorah. Right? Is this the kind of sermon you would have liked to hear from Paul in chapter 12 and 13? Tazria Metzorah? No. That would have just not gone over at all. No, he's talking about very practical things for them. He sticks to the most helpful and the practical lessons in Torah, and this is the cream of the crop. This is the depth of good sense and wisdom that the Torah offers, and they're presented in a new form for Romans' sake. That's what he's doing. If you can understand his methodology, what he's going at, then you can catch on pretty quickly. And then Shaul, eventually, he cycles back to his main agenda, and his main agenda is unity in Messiah. That's kind of his underlying idea that we've been talking about through his entire message. So, using more philosophical language, I would say, he calls his audience to live lives worthy of the God they serve. And that's kind of how he wraps things up. After he's done with this very long explanation of Torah, his summary of all things that would be good to know. This is Romans chapter 13, verses 11 through 12. Do this, knowing the time, that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep. For now, salvation, or deliverance, it's the Greek word soteria, or Hebrew word Yeshua, is nearer to us than when we first believed. The night is almost gone and the day is near. Therefore, let's rid ourselves of the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. So as I read this, I want you to think along these lines. What does night and darkness represent in Shaul's rhetoric? What is this armor of light? What are your thoughts? Like, this is obviously, he's getting more philosophical now. After teaching all the practical things like pay your taxes and don't cheat on your wife, now he's like saying, all right, light, darkness, day is over, time is coming. What is he talking about? What is this darkness? What is light? Where do you think he's coming from? What is he trying to say? Anybody?
I think he's philosophically talking about the doom that humanity is under with inevitable death. And he's talked a lot about why that's so. But without getting too religious, I think he's telling them, as Moses said in Deuteronomy, choose life, which is ultimately leading to the Messianic age, and it is at hand.
That's a good point. That's exactly how Deuteronomy wraps up, right?
I think so. We covered the practical stuff, the physical stuff, and now I think he's moving on to this is more than that.
Right.
This is spiritual also. And
There's a spirituality behind it all.
Right, and later he gets into the spiritual battle, but they're not
Very
ready for
good.
it yet.
Because we can look at human behavior, right? We can look at all the do's and don'ts, and we can look at all that, and just say, well, it just meant to make us stay in line, right? Just be decent people. And that's all it is. But then you realize that outside of us, or our good behavior or bad behavior, there's a spiritual world, which our behavior actually impacts. How we behave, what we do, what we choose to do, how faithful or unfaithful we choose to be, actually affects other people, and it affects what God does all around us. Think about it in a big picture, right? This is kind of what we're zooming out now, essentially, jumping into this idea. So this language about darkness and light, now we're speaking in a more abstract sense, right? Big terms. We all understand darkness is light is a metaphor, is a picture, something good, something bad. We all don't like sitting in the dark. We need the light to function, to do everything. Light, just a little bit of light, changes everything for us, right?
You can't help but think of Ephesians 6, the armor of God, the armor of light. And then the Torah, like we was saying this morning, the Torah is the light to our feet. So it's like it's bringing us to, and then as well as, it's not necessarily the Roman armor. If you study it out,
Right.
it's actually the Cohen's garments and
Right.
stuff like that.
Amen.
So again, we're at the Torah.
Right. So it's beautiful. There's depth here. There's depth here and there's symbolism here. And I know that you guys are catching on to the symbolism. So the armor of light, thank you for answering that question. That is going to talk about putting something on. And as you think about Ephesians, you think about other things, Shaul is going to tell you a little bit more about this armor, let's say, in just a couple of verses. But a couple more things I wanted you to notice. He's talking about time. He's talking about some other features here. Here's a question. What does he mean by salvation is near when we first believed? Isn't believing equals salvation? Why did he say that we must do this knowing the time?
I'm thinking that it's a reference to Yeshua.
Okay. Salvation is nearer than when we first believed. Whatever that reference to. We first believed. We don't really know what he's talking about. He's talking about a moment when a person came to understand something, to realize something, right? And he says, but now salvation is nearer. What does he mean by that?
I mean, like if you take the word salvation in its broadest context, the universal salvation, then like he's saying that the coming of Mashiach back to restore all things, declare war, win that war, beat up Rome, all that kind of stuff, is nearer to us. The times are there, the signs are stronger. That time period, that day that's coming is near to us than when we first believed. We can't give up now that we believed for so long in this day that's soon coming.
Bingo. That's exactly what he's talking about. That's why he says, do this knowing the time. It's already the hour. It's time for you to wake up, he says. The alarm is going off.
In all of his writings, he thought that was imminent. But
Right.
You can see that everything he wrote, everything he taught, he's like, this is going to happen any day, so just be ready.
Shaul believed that the return of the Mashiach was going to happen in his lifetime. And it could have. Why, but he firmly believed it. And especially in some of his writings, you can see it very clearly. There's a sense of urgency. He actually thinks this is going to happen right now. So he's telling these people, hold on just a minute. It's not going to be long before everything's going to come around. So when he talks about salvation here, this idea of soteria, Yeshua, we talked about it. I read to you from the prophets. What kind of salvation is he talking about? He's talking about the salvation of whom? Everything. It's the salvation of the whole world. What is salvation? Salvation is when you're walking across the street and all of a sudden something stops you for a second and a car zooms by going 50 miles an hour. And you realize one more step and I would have been pancake. But instead, you didn't make that step. And you say, thank you, God, for saving my life today. Salvation. I have just been saved. Literally, I have been spared. I've been delivered from something that could have been a very, very quick and tragic end. Maybe a very painful one. See, things like that happen in our life all the time. These personal salvations, but then there's this global idea of salvation for the world because the creation has been ruined and it needs to be redeemed. It needs to be brought back. It needs to be pulled out of its terrible tailspin that essentially that has been happening to us as the entire world and civilization. So when he talks about salvation is now, it's coming. God is going to make some things different. They're going to change. So that time is near. So get rid of the things of darkness in you. Be ready. Put on your armor of light. Be ready for that moment when it comes, because on the day Mashiach comes, do you want to be like the story of the virgins that Yeshua says in the field without lamps and no oil? Because they can't welcome him. They can't usher him into the city or into the village or into their homes because they have no way to provide the light to light the path. Because they didn't make provision. So he says, be ready. Be ready for that moment. Keep yourself pure. Remove the darkness from your life. Put on light. That's what he's talking about. Yes, it's a very spiritual talk. But I do believe, like David said, he's talking about this global salvation, this universal salvation. Not anything personal per se. It is personal to us because we have believed and we have this idea of God moving us into a better place all the time. But he's talking about something much more global. And for him, it's very imminent. He actually does believe that it's right around the corner. Yes.
Ultimately, not just Shaul, but it seems like every generation since Yeshua has, even prior to that, even, Moses, it's always been imminent that salvation was coming, that we were, at one point it was just Israel, but now it is the global perspective. So there is an imminence, and even this is still so relevant today, is just what I hear.
We have been taught to read the signs of the times. Yeshua himself told us, look for this. When this happens, the time is near. The time is near. And that's what the prophets do. They don't give us the date, but they say, look for these things happening. When these things happening, and guess what? Things have been happening all around us and we've been paying attention, so the urgency's been there, and guess what? That makes us better people.
Yes.
Because we're not complacent saying, that's going to happen 50 million years from now. The dinosaur's going to come back to life, eat us, and then maybe later, that's going to happen. No, like the sense of urgency makes you live your life today, which is an amazing way to live life, actually. So this brings us to a certain spiritual balance in our life. A lack of complacency. Wake up. The hour is near. Shaul, like I said, he gets philosophical, he gets spiritual, he gets a little prophetic on us. And these are the kinds of verses that we experience. And that's after he's finished teaching the practical aspects of the Torah. And that is his idea of, yes, choose life, choose light, put that on, put that armor on, and move forward. So, though Shaul is speaking to us in symbols, we recognize that. He addresses something very tangible. How people conduct themselves in life has a major impact. It impacts them, it impacts the world around them. So, the question that I have is, see if you can guess which segment of his audience Shaul is saying these words to. So he goes on in verses 13 to 14. Let's behave properly, as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and debauchery, not in strife and jealousy, but put on Master Yeshua, the Messiah, and make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lusts. Now again, a bit poetic, right? But we get the whole idea of not getting drunk and getting into promiscuity and debauchery, right? That right there actually describes most Roman dinner parties.
Right, right.
I mean, that's what people did. When they partied, they partied. I mean, you're talking like university campus fraternity house parties all day long. I mean, literally, you can read Roman descriptions of Roman parties. It says they drank until they could not, they puked, and then they drank some more. They empty themselves out so that they can continue partying, basically. They had places. That was the culture, that was the norm, that was the way. That's how they unwound on weekends, essentially, right? So this Shaul says, you got to stop that. Why? Because that is a part of a culture. That is not a part of a Jewish culture. Okay, it just didn't have a place in society. Not to say that some people weren't tempted to do those things, but that was just not the norm. That was not something that people did on every day, and that wasn't like, okay, that's what, if I invite friends over to my house, that's what's going to happen. Nobody expects that. But in that world, that was exactly the expectation. That the next thing is the dancing girls come out, and the next thing the clothes comes off, and that's what's going to happen. In every party. That's how parties go. So he says, you got to put that aside. Because as in the day, you're getting closer to that day. Instead, he tells them, put on Master Yeshua, the Messiah. Put him on. Wear him. That's a metaphor. Just put him on. He has given us merit. He's given us righteousness that we do not have. Put him on. He's given us an ability to fight the very thing that Shaul has been talking about fighting in his book. And that is the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to do things wrong. We can't help it. Shaul says, I don't know why I do things that I do. I don't want to do it, but I do them anyway. And this is it. He says, make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lusts. The flesh may want things. We may have these inclinations, these pulls that try to pull us in his direction. And he says, make no provision for them. Don't make plans. Don't supply yourself with opportunities for the Yetzer Hara to take hold. How do you not supply yourself by these opportunities? Stay away from this kind of stuff. Instead, put on Messiah. Walk in him, walk in his teaching, walk in his light, walk in his merit. Hold on to the blessing that you've been given and walk it. It's a very practical advice, but you got to understand, again, he's speaking to the Romans. This is part of their world. That's why I said, guess who he's talking to. I told you, he will switch audiences all the time. This is clearly a switch right there. So, chapter 13 wraps up with this heartfelt admonition. Basically, that's what he says. Just not to just believe. That's what he's not telling them, just believe and everything's going to be okay. But behave better. Shaul suggests wearing Messiah as if he was our armor. That's what he's talked about. The armor of light that he talked about, in this case, is Yeshua. That's what he's talking about. And though clearly aimed at Paul's non-Jewish audience, these words, through whom these things he mentions, they're most tempting to them. His message is very universal, always, always aiming at unity. Because a lot of times we can read these words and we can say, okay, that's a good advice. I can take this one too. It doesn't matter who you are. It's like, so Shaul tries to be universal. He tries to be focusing very much on unity when he writes these words. So, like I said, it's a letter that was written with a very clear intent and a very clear direction. So that's how chapter 13 wraps up. The amazing part is, we made it. Okay? So, that means next time, chapter 14, and chapter 14 talks about eating things and not eating things and all kinds of stuff. And it'll be an interesting chapter, let's put it that way. Okay, so I'll give you a little preview. You can read it ahead of time. You know where I'm going. It's very easy, but let's